BBC Radio 5 Live.
I listen every day.
I trust the presenters.
Let's talk about some of the big business impact.
The voice of the UK, Stephen Nolan. BBC Radio 5 Live.
Russia and the United States have held high-level talks in Geneva to try to prevent an escalation of the conflict in Ukraine. The US Secretary of State, Antony Blinken, warned that any move by Russia to invade Ukraine would be met with a swift, severe response.
We stand firmly with Ukraine in support of its sovereignty and territorial integrity. We've been clear. If any Russian military forces move across Ukraine's border, that's a renewed invasion. It will be met with swift, severe, and a united response from the United States and our partners and allies.
His Russian counterpart, Sergei Lavrov, said the talks were constructive but reiterated demands for a ban on Ukraine joining NATO. Russia has massed 100,000 troops at the border with Ukraine, but Mr. Lavrov denied it's planning to invade.
At the end of our meeting, we agreed that next week the US is going to present us with written answers to all of our proposals. And I would like to once again remind everyone who analyzes our public statements that never before has Russia threatened, through its official representatives, the Ukrainian people.
At a news conference on Wednesday, US President Joe Biden appeared to suggest that the United States might be prepared to meet a minor incursion of Ukraine with a weaker response.
Russia will be held accountable if it invades, and it depends on what it does. It's one thing if it's a minor incursion and then we end up having a fight about what to do and not do, etc.
In a written statement shortly afterwards, Mr. Biden's press secretary moved to clarify his comments, or at least that's what they're claiming they were doing, when she said the following: if any Russian troops move across the Ukraine border, that's a renewed invasion. It'll be met by a swift, severe and united response from the United States and our allies. And on Thursday, the US President himself moved to distance himself from his remarks the day before.
If any assembled Russian units move across the Ukrainian border, that is an invasion.
Well, let's speak to the military analyst Daniel L. Davis, Senior Fellow for Defence Priorities, former Lieutenant Colonel in the US Army, who deployed into combat zones 4 times. Hello, Daniel.
Hi, how are you?
I'm okay, thank you. So I guess at least the Russia and the United States, they're still talking. So diplomacy is not dead.
Well, it's not dead, but, it's really important to look at two separate things, but in conjunction. Number one is what people are saying, and then number two is what people are doing. And you just played a clip there of Lavrov earlier after the meeting with Blinken saying that, they're still on the negotiating path, et cetera. But later in the day, he came out with a much stronger statement that said that if the United States does not take heed to their warnings about their red line, which is they need guarantees from the United States and NATO that they're not going to go any further, there would be, quote, the most severe consequences, end quote. And of course, he didn't say exactly what that was, but then you look at what Russia is doing, and not just do they have these 100,000 troops allegedly on the border, but in the last few days even, they've been increasing the number of troops. They brought reportedly Iskander missiles, which are the most accurate short-range missiles that they have, and very devastating. And now that their Navy is going to deploy in critical locations in both the Atlantic and the Pacific, which could put missiles in range of the United States. So they're taking actions which could be very provocative.
Play this out for me, please. For how long, for example, could the likes of Ukraine withhold any type of, how could they resist, for how long could they resist a foreign incursion?
If Russia decides that they're going to go all in and they take these forces, which are arrayed in basically 3 regional places around the border, and they launch a coordinated major incursion, there's no way that Ukraine can stop it. They can, the Ukraine has a military. They're a lot better than they were in 2014, but that's a relative term. So they couldn't stop Russia if they wanted to. And then the question is going to be, what is the West going to do about it? Because we're not going to go to war with Russia, or at least I hope we don't. There are frankly, some strange comments from some former senior ranking government officials who have said that we should be willing to use military force, but that would be crazy to do because it couldn't succeed. Well, what a problem is and I'm talking two former assistant secretaries of defense, not minor officials. These people are saying that we should use military force to show Russia we're serious and that they can't get away with this and that there's a price to pay. But the problem is that completely absent from their argument is what is the price to us to take that kind of action? And it would be catastrophic potentially. And of course, it could go nuclear, which would be devastating for the entire Europe and the United States itself. And these people aren't looking at those things. But look, I'll tell you one other thing. What also is not getting any talk about, if the United States wants to keep Ukraine from being invaded, there's a lot easier way to do that. And that is to take NATO membership off the table. And, that's not giving in to Russia. That's just looking at reality, that they're poised and can make good on their threat. If we don't want them to attack, we need to take the reason away that they're giving, which is what they've been saying since really the late 90s. They've been saying that's a red line.
But this is bigger, Daniel, surely, than the Ukraine. This is about the signaling to Russia the authority for forces like the United States. If they're seen to be at all worried about the might of the Russian military, then how does that augur well for the future?
Well, see, I don't think that that's the case at all, especially when you examine the actual combat forces that are on both sides of the NATO and on the Russian side. Russia has plenty of combat forces, and they can absolutely take a good chunk of Ukraine. I don't think they could take the whole thing, but they could certainly take the eastern portion of it where they have the Russian-speaking people. But they don't have the infrastructure to go beyond that. And there's absolutely no way that Putin, who's been very calculated his use of force throughout his 2 decades in power, he knows he can get by with this. He knows he could take Ukraine or the Crimea in 2014. He knew he could take a small piece of Georgia in 2008, and he succeeded in doing all of those. But if you go 1 inch beyond Ukraine, now then you run into 30-nation military alliance with Article 5 guarantees, and he can't come close to matching that power. And nor would he try, because he would have no chance of success, and any gains that he could make here would all be lost. And I think because of that, it really is about Ukraine. He does not want NATO on his border.
And it's also about protecting the United States' economic interests primarily, isn't it? For America's ability to prosper economically. That's where we're at.
And that's where it should be. And in fact, that's where Europe should be. That's exactly what they should be paying attention to. And you see that that's actually one of the problems when people are talking about having this so-called unified response. If Russia moves, there's no unified response right now, because they had to, at first it was talk about taking Russia out of SWIFT. Well, that would have severe ramifications for European countries, and they're doing business. Then they talked about some of these other sanctions, but then because 40% of Europe's natural gas comes from Russia, they have significant leverage over Russia. You can't replace that amount of gas in, this winter, and that would be catastrophic for, a lot of Europe, and they know that. So we also need to be taking care of the economic issues and making sure we don't make a bad situation worse.
So how do you call this? What do you think is going to happen next?
If we don't do something, if we don't change our position, which is unflexibility, not willing to give Russia any of the things that they're asking for, I think the chances are very high, probably better than 50-50, that Russia launches a limited incursion strike into Ukraine to take some amount of the territory, and then they're going to basically call our bluff and see what we're going to do. We can avoid that by just making some calculated and wise diplomatic decisions. But I unfortunately, I just don't think we're going to do it.
But once Russian tanks are rolling across the Ukrainian border, then the options are fewer.
Well, they're much fewer. That's exactly what I've been arguing about in many of the things I've been writing and some of the television promotions or programs, and I've got another one I'm working on right now. The only way to avoid that bad situation is to take action right now while we still have options. But the minute that those tanks cross the border and missiles start flying and planes start falling out of the sky, then now you have almost no options. And now then you just have to accept a bad situation or escalate and then take the chance of making it go out of control. And those are both horrible choices.
Daniel, finally, let me flip this. Final question. We've been talking about the risks to the United States. What are the risks to Putin in all of this?
Well, I think that Putin has been playing this game. This is a long game for him. He's been playing this for many years, and he's been slowly moving the pieces into position, and he doesn't take gambles. He takes prudent risk, and he doesn't take gambles. And so he now knows that because of the energy requirements for Europe, because of the economic implications of SWIFT and the forces that are arrayed in the positions and the knowledge that the United States is not going to go to war against him for this, his risk is very low. And so the only thing he could do to mess it up is to try to take too much. And if he did anything to threaten anyone beyond Ukraine, then he's no longer in a strong position, and he would, lose a lot of credibility and suffer harm. But as long as he keeps his objectives limited, I think he can endure anything that would come after that.
Daniel L. Davies, thank you very much indeed, sir. Thank you.
Always my pleasure. Thanks for having me.